All right, everybody. Here we are. We are back for another video. So I've talked a lot about civilization, right? We've talked about it kind of in relation to certain groups that, maybe might not be considered a quote-unquote civilization. In my Eurasian steppe video, we've talked about it in its relation to ideology. So now we're going to devote a video exclusively to civilization. So, first starting with where did it originate from, and then from there building to what it has evolved into, and to give even a little bit further detail on that, what it has evolved into, what are the core dominant ideologies, philosophies, worldviews that have shaped civilization and have formed human civilization as we have known it throughout the course of history. So without further ado, the first component of this topic is going to be the origin of civilization. So again, let me give you a brief definition of civilization. Civilization is a culture in which this culture has various components. They have a written language. They are sedentary. They live in a set place. Based upon living in a set place, they have very often or most likely have things such as agriculture. They can produce food, instead of foraging for food. And based upon that, they have architecture. They build buildings. They build settled homes that they live in. They build cities. They have buildings in which they live in, which all sorts of other activities take place. So that is, in a nutshell, civilization. Okay? So, as we know it today, there were 4 original civilizations, or this is widely believed, amongst historians and, anthropologists and, all sorts of related fields, that there were 4 initial civilizations. And the 4 initial civilizations were Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. Okay, that's the first. Then Egypt, the ancient Egyptian civilization. Then ancient China. And then ancient India, the Indus River Valley civilization, based around the Indus River of what is today modern Pakistan. Okay? So, we're going to start with the oldest. So out of all these all developed independently. So it wasn't the case where one developed and then kind of spread it to the others, and then they all kind of picked up where this initial one, started. These all developed independently, right? So regardless of what the other one was doing, even if, one of them may have started before them, they had no idea. They were just doing their own thing. They figured this out on their own. Okay? And it should be noted that all of these civilizations developed around rivers, right? So there's a theory in history where they state that in order for a civilization to develop, or initially when human civilization first developed, they had to develop in a environment that was not that was arid, that was a rough, harsh environment, right? But it also, despite being a truly just arid, harsh environment where, life in this environment is hard, it had some remedy to this. It had something in the environment where, despite this harsh environment, they were able to use these few good aspects of their environment to overcome the harshness of their general environment. So usually what that one saving grace for them, for these cultures to be able to develop into civilizations, their saving grace was usually a river. So usually they lived in a very arid, maybe desert-like environment, and through this just arid, just hopeless desert, there's a river. Okay? And with that river was able to supply you with water, And from there you could grow crops, and you can kind of find some sort of escape from the harshness of this desert. So there's a lot of theories about, what this situation of a harsh environment with some small aspect of their environment that can, give them a means to save themselves from this harsh environment. There's various ideas about what caused that. So me personally, I have a way of looking at it, which I think might be kind of a good way to simplify it and put it in a very simple way. Let's say you have somebody who lives in just an arid environment, desert, right? Or just tundra, snow, right? Just hopeless, bleak. There's no way you could survive this land. Well, how is this person going to develop anything from that? They'd have no tools to develop that, right? So they will not develop. They would likely not develop a civilization. They would likely be, nomads or hunter-gatherers, and just wander around, for their next, their next meal, their next, food that they're gonna search for. They would wander around until they're able to find some sort of shelter, maybe an oasis if they lived in the desert, maybe some sort of cave where they could build a fire if they lived in the snow-infested tundra, right? So if the environment is too harsh, then you have no out. Right? There's no opportunity for you to build anything. Conversely, let's say you lived in, some just beautiful tropical environment. You have the ocean, you go pick a fish out of the ocean, you go and grab a crab out of the ocean and you eat it. And then, you climb up and then you pick a fruit off of the tree. There's trees everywhere and there's fruit off of the tree. So anything that you want, it's there for you. You don't really have to suffer like somebody from these arid environments to find your food. In fact, not only do you have to suffer, it's bountiful, right? Well, you have everything you need. If you have everything you need, why would you build something? Why would you build something if there's no need for it, if there's no motivation? Your needs are already met. So with that being said, generally in places that were too arid, you did not see initial civilizations develop. And in locations that were too bountiful, maybe let's say, for example, I don't know, maybe some tropical island somewhere in, the Pacific Ocean, you did not see civilization develop there either, because, they had whatever they needed. There was no need to build some sort of social order. So with that being said, that's the reason why, in my opinion, and I'm sure the opinion of a lot of other historians and people in academia, that's the reason why civilizations developed in these places where it's an arid environment, and then in the middle of this arid environment there's some tool, some bounty in their environment, some part of their environment that they can actually use to navigate, to find a solution to this arid environment that they're in, and they're able to meet their needs, despite being in an environment where they're surrounded overwhelmingly by an area where it's very difficult for them to meet their needs. So based upon that, usually we saw civilizations develop around a river, and generally around the river it's generally quite desertous. So the first civilization we're going to talk about is Mesopotamia. That's the oldest. So in human history, the first civilization, again, we define civilization as sedentary, build architecture, build homes, build cities, written language, moral code, laws, etc. These type of things. The first that we saw was in Mesopotamia, which is modern day Iraq. So we're going to go look at, what does the name Mesopotamia mean? Mesopotamia pretty much means two rivers, right? And in Mesopotamia, the two rivers that you have are the Tigris and the Euphrates, right? So if you want to look at modern Iraq, you generally, in kind of our Western conception of Iraq, we think very desertous, right? So there is quite a bit of desert. But then within this, in between this desert on various different sides, you have these two rivers, which are actually very, very fertile rivers, right? And that's why they call the region of Iraq to even further spread outward, Iraq as well as Syria, Israel, Lebanon, this whole region, they call it the Fertile Crescent, right? So these rivers that are within this desert are very fertile. So you have a desert on all sides, and in between you have these two rivers, and everything kind of within these two rivers or around these two rivers is very fertile. So these people had a motivation to escape this harsh desert, and they had the right tools to do so. They had two extremely fertile rivers. And from there, these would develop into various city-states, the two most famous of which would be Ur and Uruk. And these cities were created and inhabited by a people known as the Sumerians. So to just give a little nod to one of my previous videos, the video of language families, we talked a little bit about how people can be kind of, culturally, seen as how related or unrelated they are culturally to other groups based upon their language. Well, the Sumerians were, as we know it, there's a lot of debate about what their origins were, but they are believed to be a language isolate. So all of the language families that we have today, the language spoken by the Sumerians was unrelated to any of them, right? So we had the Sumerians. They developed lots of cities, little city-states, which were each independent, right? They didn't have like one unified country. Each little city was its own country, right? So they all developed kind of independently on their, or semi-independently, but they, were all related to each other. So I'm sure maybe, there was some influence from one city-state to the other, but nonetheless, these people who were the Sumerians, who lived in between these two rivers, which was their oasis from the harsh deserts of the region they lived in, developed city-states which had a written language. The writing system they used was the first writing system in the history of the world, or believed to be in the history of the world, and that is called cuneiform. And from there, they built, like I said, they built their cities. They had their written language, and this was the first civilization in human history. The next major civilization to develop, again, I want to repeat, these developed independently, right? So it wasn't that Sumerians came out and developed their city-states, and then all the other civilizations, all the other three of these four developed because the Sumerians passed it on to them. No, they all developed it independently. So the next one, despite being in very close geographical proximity to the Sumerians, the next one did develop fully independently, and that other civilization is probably very likely the most famous, to a Western audience, and that was the ancient Egyptians. So, if we're gonna, we're talking before, where do civilizations develop? Harsh environment, rivers that kind of provide them with an out from their harsh environment. If we look at Egypt, right? Well, Egypt is quite desertous. It's majority desert, right? However, what's a river that's famous, when you think about Egypt, that pops to mind when you think about Egypt? That's the Nile River. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the biggest river in the world, right? So you have desert on all sides, but then you have this river, and it's, again, a very fertile river, right? And this river goes all the way down. It even cuts through, modern-day Sudan. I believe it even flows into modern-day Ethiopia, right? And then when it converges at the point of the part of Egypt that touches the Mediterranean Sea, you see it branch into lots of little directions, right? And this is what is known as the Nile Delta, right? It's where all these, the river splits in all these different directions, and it's a very fertile region, right? So the Egyptian people, the ancient Egyptians, the people who founded the civilization, they were surrounded on all sides by this harsh desert, and they had this really high motivation to find an escape from it. So they had this wonderful, beautiful river, and they used that to their advantage. and they developed agriculture around this river. And from developing agriculture, they developed, they became sedentary. Instead of wandering and being nomads or hunter-gatherers, they stayed in one place. From there, they built homes. From there, they built cities, etc. And then you build cities, and then now you have to manage everything in the city. So how do you manage? You need writing. So you develop, a form of written communication, written language. And just like the Sumerians developed their form of written language, which was cuneiform, the Egyptians developed their own form of written language, which is probably the most known to us today as a Western audience, and that is hieroglyphics. And I don't want to get on too much of a tangent. This is another video for another time. But actually, hieroglyphics is the origin of the overwhelming majority of writing systems that we use in the world today. Overwhelming majority of written languages. Okay, so that's the next civilization. That was the ancient Egyptian civilization. And then now moving on, we're going to move to the civilization of ancient China. Ancient China, as anthropologists and archaeologists and historians, etc., understand it, initially China developed as a bunch of little independent civilizations in very close proximity to one another, which eventually, as they kind of got bigger, coalesced into one civilization. There was a few of them, probably, correct me if I'm wrong, or the most well-known of them is referred to as the Erlitou civilization, but nonetheless, again, same formula. River, right? You have the Yellow River, you had the Yangtze River. They're quite close to the Gobi Desert, right, which is quite arid, right? But then they have these beautiful rivers of the Yangtze and the Yellow River, and from there they were able to escape their harsh environment, this harsh arid landscape, and use these fertile rivers to grow crops which would not be able to be grown in more arid areas, that are not in close proximity to these rivers. Again, they develop, they start growing crops, agriculture. From agriculture, you become sedentary. You're no longer a hunter-gatherer. You're no longer a nomad. You're staying in one place. If you're staying in one place, you need a home. You build a home. You also sometimes may have excess yields from your crops, so you need to store them. You build storage facilities. That's more architecture. Then you need to keep track of everybody living in these cities. You need to keep track of all of your yields from your crops. You make a written language. Their writing system was called the oracle bone writing system because their writing system was written on bones, oracle bones. So they developed their own written language, which is the modern day ancestor of the current Chinese characters, which is the main writing system of China today and also is used to some extent in Japan as well. And like I said, they developed independently without any communication, without any contact to Mesopotamia or Egypt. They developed their own civilization. So then moving on, we go to our final of the four civilizations, and this is the Indus River Valley civilization. And this is the civilization that would kind of almost be the forerunner for what would develop into the culture of India, right? But the civilization, like I said, this is called the Indus River Valley civilization. So again, what's the common theme that we're touching upon? We have a very arid environment, right? But we have this beautiful river, right? So in the case of the Indus River Valley civilization, well, what was this beautiful river? Of course, it was the Indus River, right? Which is located in modern-day Pakistan. And if you know a little bit about the geography of Pakistan, certain parts are quite desertous, right? But this Indus River Valley is quite fertile, so it's able to produce lots of beautiful yields in agriculture. So the people who lived around this area had this motivation to escape the harshness of this arid desert environment, which was in close proximity to them. So their solution, their out from this, was to go to this beautiful Indus River, and from there, to start doing agriculture, developing crops, crop yields, planting, making grains and vegetables and whatnot, right? And then from there, again, you can grow all these great things from this river. Well, you don't need to go and be a hunter-gatherer and forage anymore, or be a nomad. You got it all right here. So you can just, set up shop and, start being sedentary. And then you're sedentary. Well, you build a physical home to live in. You build a house, and then you got all these grains and these vegetables and these yields, right? And you need to store them somewhere. You build storage facilities, and then you have all these people with homes and storage facilities in close proximity. So now you build it into a city, and then now you have all this, and you have all these yields that you need to keep track of. So you develop a writing system. So they did develop their own writing system, but unlike the case of China, where this would become the forerunner for the modern Chinese writing system, this writing system is no longer in use, and there are none of its descendants that are currently in use. So the modern writing systems of India are not descended from this Indus River Valley writing system. However, nonetheless, this became one of the 4 civilizations from which all other human civilization would branch out from. And again, it did not develop by having this knowledge passed down from China. It did not develop by having this knowledge passed down from Mesopotamia. It did not develop by having this knowledge passed down from Egypt. It developed independently. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive a notification whenever I release a new video.